John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. Yeah, I think it was in John, the first chapter of John. It speaks about that. Jesus was there since the beginning. But my point is, he actually knew that he would have to give up his only literal biological son on the cross, from like literally way back. And so that's crazy to me, because that again shows his agape, because for him to want to sacrifice his, like be willing to sacrifice his one and only actual biological son, so that, you know, we could be atoned for, so that we wouldn't have to do animal sacrifice, so that we could dwell with him and have an actual relationship with him, because now we would be pure because of Jesus. That to me is crazy. So and yeah, sometimes I cry about it because I'm touched. But yeah, so hello everybody, my name is Kanaya Kagana. It's okay, you don't have to say my surname because people don't know how to say the click. But yeah, this is my first video in the YouTube channel, our YouTube channel, which is God, mine, and our camera woman back there, Lolita. It's called the Agape Movement, as you probably already know if you're watching the video. But the reason why I decided to call it that is because, well, it kind of just came to me, so it might have been God, you know, sometimes you don't know for sure. But anyways, because it's the word agape, that's the main thing, which is the Greek word for God's love, you know, specifically the Greek made, you know, that word specifically for God's love. You cannot use it outside of his, you know, context, outside of God's context. And it just expresses his unconditional love that we as humans are incapable of, because I mean, the man's then did the most, you know, for us, you know, for human beings, for human race, for humanity, and he's been dealing with, you know, a lot of rejection from humanity and a lot of things. So in order for you to, you know, be able to do agape, you'd have to be God, because you know. So yeah, that's why I named it that, because you know, it expresses God's love, but it also, God's love is also kind of the reason why we exist. It's kind of the reason why, you know, Jesus came, because if he didn't love us, he wouldn't have tried to have a way to kind of bring us closer to him and redeem us, you know. So it's a really kind of a big thing. It's kind of the root of everything, you know. If he didn't love us, if he didn't have agape, then we wouldn't exist, you know, it would have been a flaw. So yeah, the title of this video is Who's This Jesus Guy Anyways? Called it that because I feel like alongside with God's love, Jesus is also a very important figure. I mean, literally Christianity is basically like Christianity, so it wouldn't exist without him, you know. He did a lot of things. He's literally responsible for the entire of humanity's, you know, salvation. And so if, you know, we didn't have him, you know, then yeah. And he's the root, and so he's the theme of the Bible. Throughout the Bible, he's the theme of it, you know. And yeah, so I have a bit of notes here because I like to go off a tangent, so I want to make sure that I stick to what I need to say. I wanted to start off by also defining Christianity as a, like, the actual word, because, you know, some people might have a misconception, or, you know. So I googled it, because Google is our best friend, and it says Christianity is the most widely practiced religion in the world, with more than 2 billion followers. Damn. The Christian faith centers on beliefs regarding the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, which I think is perfect, because that was what I was trying to say. And then yeah, so a lot of people, they kind of don't get it when, like, people might come to them, maybe like, I don't know, Jehovah's Witnesses or something, who might come to them and be like, Jesus died for your sins, you know, he loves you, and, you know, accept his salvation, accept him in your heart, believe in him. And people would be confused, because like, oh, this man was like, was crucified 2,000 years ago, over 2,000 years ago, so what does that have to do with me? What does that have to do with my sins, you know? A lot of people kind of don't get, even sometimes Christians, they don't really fully understand the entirety of Jesus, you know, the entirety of his story, the entirety of his purpose. It's kind of, there's a lot of confusion about it. So I thought he's very important. He's the core of all of this, you know. So let's start there, you know. It's something that I feel everyone should know before you, whether you're Christian or not a Christian, before you even embark on the journey of knowing God or knowing more about Christianity. He's a starting point. So yeah, so we'll start in the Old Testament because, okay, so for those of you who don't know, if you're not Christian, perhaps, I don't know, the Bible is split into two kind of parts in a way. The first part is called the Old Testament. Some can say the Old Covenant. The Old Testament is like the time before Jesus came. That's what it is, you know. It's the books, it's the stories, it's the retellings of before Jesus' time. And then there's the New Testament, or some might say the New Covenant, that is, you know, from Jesus' birth kind of onwards till his like crucifixion, his resurrection, and then we have like the book like Revelations, which talks about his coming, his second coming. So yeah, so in the Old Testament he's a prophecy, or multiple prophecies, obviously, you know. Some scholars believe that there's over 300 prophecies about him in the Old Testament, and you know, there's a lot of scripture on it. There's a lot of, you know, especially like Isaiah, I think it was chapter 42 or something, I think it was 42, 43, where literally the chapter is specifically just for like his crucifixion. Basically it speaks about his crucifixion, which is very, very painful, and for those of you who don't even believe that Jesus actually really died, maybe just watching this for like curiosity, you should go check out the movie The Case for Christ, because it's based on a true story. It's about this guy who was an atheist, and you know, his wife started believing, and then he was like pissed, so he's like, I'm gonna prove that, you know, God doesn't really exist. And so he goes on this whole thing, and then this guy, he asks this other guy who's a Christian, like, oh, if I wanted to prove Christianity wrong, like, what would I do if I wanted to prove God doesn't exist? So he's like, disprove Jesus, specifically his resurrection, and you know, the whole thing is basically a house of cards. And so obviously he failed, but yeah, you should go check out that movie, because it gives, you know, specifics and scientific backing to Jesus' resurrection and all this other stuff. So yeah, so in the Old Testament, again, as I said, it was prophecies. But another thing is, like, there was a lot of confusion in the sense that, you know, it was like the Jews, then Christianity hadn't really been born yet because Christ hadn't come. And so it was the Jews that were there, and God had given them the law. Some of you might just know it as the 10 Commandments. There's like, I think 610 more besides the 10 Commandments, but those are like the main ones. But there's a lot more, trust me. There's a whole book. The book of Leviticus covers it, Numbers covers it, Deuteronomy covers it, so you can go check that out in the Bible. There's a lot more laws, and so a lot of people actually believed that to be saved, as we are as Christians now today, but back then, to be saved, you had to actually keep these laws, make sure that you do them, which is impossible. You can't do all of them because you have to be perfect. That's why Jesus came. That's partially why Jesus came. So you can't really do all the laws, but they thought they could, and they thought that if you do the laws, if you fulfill them, if you follow God's commandments, all of them, then you're saved. And that wasn't actually really true. Even back then, Jesus was how you got saved. Because right now, for those of you who don't know, to be a Christian, you have to, you know, confess with your mouth that, you know, Jesus is Lord, you know, that he died for you on the cross, that he rose up again, and believe in your heart as well. There's different variations in that. Romans 10 speaks about how to go about that. But basically, that's it. You have to confess with your mouth and believe in your heart. And so even back then, they actually had to believe in the Messiah to come, which was Jesus. So even then, Jesus was a figure, an important figure. Obviously, God was like, oh, this guy's going to look like this, he's going to look like that. But there was prophecies, and in order for you to kind of be saved, you have to believe in the Redeemer to come. So the law had nothing to do with their salvation. Just want to add that, because strangely enough, to this day, there's a lot of people within the church, you know, outside of the church, who actually believe that if you do things that affects your salvation, like if you fulfill the 10 Commandments properly to the T, then you can be saved and stuff like that. If you confess your sins, you're going to be saved, and all the stuff that's kind of like really annoying. So, and not true. And so that's not true. The law has nothing to do with your salvation. So there's several scriptures on this. Ephesians 2 8:9, Galatians 2:21, Romans 8:3, Romans 9:16, Romans 11:6. So I'm not going to read them because that would just be too long. But you can just go check that out on your own. You can Google them. Google, again, is our best friend. And so that will be able to just kind of give you clarity. But Ephesians, Galatians, and Romans really covers, and I think also a bit of Hebrews, really covers the law. You know, what it was, its purpose, and the fact that it really could not save you. You literally are saved through Jesus. So the law was actually there to show them how imperfect they were, you know, how they couldn't do things by their own righteousness, by their own flesh, you know, with their own being. They couldn't fulfill all those laws. I mean, some of these laws are crazy, guys. And when God gave them these laws, he asked them 3 different times before he gave them that, are they sure that they wanted to do this? Because they were going crazy. They were making idols. They were turning away from God, basically. And God is, if you don't know that, God really hates idolatry. No, because he's a jealous God, he's a zealous God. He wants us to love him only and serve him only. Obviously, I mean, why would you want, to share your people? And so they were going off a tangent. They were doing all these things that were completely contrary to God's word. And so he sent Moses to them 3 different times to ask them, to show them the law, all of these laws, to read them to them, and to just show them and ask them, can they do it? Can they fulfill these laws? And they said yes each and every time. And they were kind of excited also because they felt like now they could, this is now the Israelites, they could do this. They could finally gain God's salvation. They could finally gain his favor, because up until that point he literally just did stuff with them purely out of love, purely out of the covenant, the promise, the contract, if you will, that he had with their ancestors, Abraham and stuff like that. And so a lot of people were they couldn't really accept this, because they're why is he doing this? Why would he do this for us and stuff like that? And it's really hard when you've been slaves, because they were slaves in Egypt for about 400 years. But it's really hard to accept something when you've been in a certain state. So it's hard to accept just someone being kind to you, being loving to you, when you've been abused all your life. And so they were there, so they would keep on turning back to things that were comfortable, or things that were of this world, that were conformed to this world. And so when God gave them the law, he didn't really want them to keep it to earn his favor, because they already had his favor. But he wanted them to kind of see their need for Jesus, and to be able to believe, and to be able to be humble before God, and for when Jesus came, for them to be able to receive him, because they understood that, I can't do this on my own, there's no way. So definitely Jesus is real, definitely I need the Messiah, because I can't keep all 613 of these laws. And if I believe on Jesus, I don't have to, because that's how that's what he's here for. And so so the law was there for that. So there's another part of the law, which is kind of sacrifices. With sacrifices, they kind of were a type and shadow of Jesus' blood, because when you sacrifice the lamb and you sacrifice an animal, it didn't really atone for their sins forever and ever, which Jesus did. It only temporarily covered their sin, it only temporarily cleansed the sin. It wasn't something that was forever. It was a short-term redemption that they had to do constantly. And so when Jesus came, God didn't want people to do that anymore. He didn't want them to do sacrifices anymore. He didn't want them to go through all of this anymore. But they had to, because man had been separated from God after the fall, which is when Adam and Eve bit into the apple of the knowledge of good and evil, from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they fell, and there was a spiritual death, which is a separation from God. It's not actually like your spirit actually dies, because then your body would die, but there was a separation from God, and he couldn't dwell with them anymore, because they were unclean. They knew things, they knew of sin, they were kind of living in the world, doing things of the world. And so when he required these sacrifices from them, it was kind of a means to an end until Jesus came. So this is crazy, because this is kind of shows how foreknowing God is, and how far ahead he sees, because for Jesus to have been already there basically and since after the fall, probably even before Jesus was there before the fall. It says so in John, I think it's John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. Yeah, I think it was in John, the first chapter of John. It speaks about that. Jesus was there since the beginning. But my point is, he actually knew that he would have to give up his only literal biological son on the cross, from like literally way back. And so that's crazy to me, because that again shows his agape, because for him to want to sacrifice his, like be willing to sacrifice his one and only actual biological son, so that, you know, we could be atoned for, so that we wouldn't have to do animal sacrifice, so that we could dwell with him and have an actual relationship with him, because now we would be pure because of Jesus. That to me is crazy. So and yeah, sometimes I cry about it because I'm touched. But yeah, so another thing that we have in the New Testament as New Testament believers is that when we die, we go straight to heaven. Unlike back in the day, they didn't go to hell, but they didn't go to heaven. They went to this place that's kind of in between. I think it's called like paradise, you know. And but after Jesus came and he ascended up into heaven, he went with him. That's in Ephesians. So yeah, so in the Old Testament, another thing that we see is that God was setting the stage for Jesus. He was preparing for Jesus's arrival, right? Obviously through prophecies, but also it's like a great example of this is Jesus' lineage. His lineage is insane. Like, this guy has David, who's the writer of Psalms, the book of Psalms, one of the most loved books in the Bible. The man's is not perfect. He did a lot, like, okay, but then that's what God does. He uses the most imperfect people with the exception of Jesus. But literally, David, I'm pretty sure he had an affair with his friend's wife and they murdered the guy. So good tough. But anyways, yeah, so he wrote the book of Psalms, and he's Jesus' like ancestor basically. Rahab, who was a prostitute, also used by God, but she also displayed so much faith. I don't remember which book this was in. Oh man, I forgot what book this was in the Bible. But she's displayed so much faith because she wasn't a believer, but she actually helped believers and actually believed that God existed. And, you know, yeah, there's a bit of story there, you know, for those who know. Like, he has so many people. He has Ruth, you know, she has her own book as well, a woman who showed such great faith and commitment to God, and commitment to her mother-in-law. And so he literally has all these people. He's literally a descendant of Abraham, actually, and Jacob. If you guys know Abraham, you know. If you don't know, go to Genesis, you'll find out. He was promised that he would be a father of many nations. He showed great faith. He was ready to basically maybe he already knew that God wouldn't want him to kill his son, to actually sacrifice him, but God had asked him to take his son up a hill and basically murder the guy, you know, and sacrifice him. His only son, his son that he got when he was like 99 years old, you know. It was his first son basically. And he was like, I was like, what? And he went up the hill prepared to do what God asked him to do, and then God stopped him through an angel, obviously. But I personally believe he knew that God wouldn't want him to do that, but he was obedient. So anyways, that's a pretty cool, you know, thing. He also did some things of his own. He was not perfect. And I think that's also another way that you can see God's agape, in the sense that he uses people that are imperfect, literally. Like, Abraham denied his wife twice, you know, gave his wife over to some random guy at some point, twice actually, yeah. And he did not, you know, he did not do the best things. He didn't make the best decisions. He was imperfect, you know. The guy who wrote, I'm pretty sure, a quarter, actually more than a quarter, he rewrote a lot of the Old Testament. Apostle Paul, he literally used to murder, like mass murder Christians, right, before he became one. He literally used to like kill them. And so but now he's a writer of so many, you know, books, Ephesians, Galatians, I think Romans. He writes so many books in the New Testament, and yet he started off pretty tough. But yeah. And so the genealogy of Jesus can be found in Matthew's and Luke. I think Matthew's 1 2 to 16 and Luke 3 23 to 38. let's talk about, again, we're in the Old Testament, let's talk about a bit of Jesus' birth, the circumstances. So obviously the prophecies said that he would be born of a virgin, and he was. I think this is another kind of pointer to how God is foreknowing and has foreknowledge and is kind of all-knowing, because Jesus' birth, which starts in the New Testament in Matthew, they speak about it, and where the prophecies are like so far apart. They were written so far apart, you know, the years between them are quite long, and so there's no way the people in the Old Testament books would have known, and the prophets then would have known how Jesus was going to be born and where he was going to be born if it weren't for God. So it definitely is a supernatural thing. In the next video I will be talking about okay, Jesus' birth and his life a bit, and I'm going to go more into detail into his personality and stuff like that, because he had one. I think that's important. And the fact that he was actually born of a virgin, I think God did that because he didn't want there to be like any doubt that, you know, Jesus was born of God, because the Old Testament and the New Testament books were written so far apart, and the fact that Jesus actually was born and it actually happened, it's amazing, because the only way the Old Testament prophets could have known was through God, because it was so far apart, there was no way they could have known. And yeah, and so God used the Old Testament time, he took that time as preparation to prepare people for Jesus' coming, to prepare Jesus' lineage. For example, with the Noah's Ark, with the flood at that time, for those of you who don't know, but anyone, I think everyone knows the story, but there was a flood in Noah's time, but God actually took 100 years to prepare people through Noah, to let them know, to warn them, and people didn't listen. There was only like 8 people only who listened. But anyways, he used the flood to wipe out the entire of humanity, with the exception of the 8 people, Noah's family, and some animals that were in an ark. And so a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, you know, like, he seems so vengeful, you know. But I see it as God, at that time, it was very, very bad. And God knew by the time it came for Jesus to be born, there would be no virgins. Maybe the concept of virginity wouldn't even exist. And if Jesus was not born of a virgin, people would not believe his prophecies. And if he had a prophecy and it wasn't fulfilled, people would be like, is God really? You know, is he all knowing really? Is he really that powerful? And it would cause a lot of doubt. And so he had to make sure that there was some form of, purity, for lack of a better word, you know, for Mary to actually be a virgin, so that Jesus could be born, so that another prophecy could be fulfilled, so that people could believe. And so he was always just so foreknowing. He was always preparing things. He was always making sure that he's consistent, and he was keeping his word, and he was staying true, because, you know, that's who he is. And so yeah, I think another thing that I wanted to point out was, a lot of people believe that in the Old Testament God was very different from now, which is in Hebrews it says that he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And he had to be that way for different situations. The Noah one I already gave you, but also because there was a separation, like I mentioned earlier, between man and God spiritually. He couldn't communicate with man the same way, and he couldn't commune with him, and we couldn't abide in him. And so he had to communicate in a very different way, and often those times were radical, but that was how people like understood him, got what he was trying to say. He had to be really radical sometimes, because people didn't get it at the time, people didn't understand him at that time. And you know, sometimes you have to use fear, and that's not his heart. And so yeah, to just kind of recap, we spoke about the fact that, okay, the Old Testament was just filled with Old Testament prophecies about Jesus. Hopefully I'll be able to put some scriptures on the screen, but it was also talking about God's foreknowledge. He's foreknowing how he was actually preparing people for Jesus' coming, and he was preparing his lineage, he was preparing his genealogy, he was preparing a lot of things, setting the space, the atmosphere for Jesus to come. That how salvation literally has been the same, which is another attribute to God's consistency, because in order for you to be saved, to be a Christian, to be a believer, to be a Jew at the time, because Christians weren't in existence because Jesus hadn't yet come, you had to believe on the Redeemer to come in the Old Testament. And so the law literally did nothing for you. Even now, keeping commandments, being kind, being good, that's really good, especially as a Christian, is really important, but it won't gain favor from God. It won't make God love you more or anything like that. He just loves people. He loves humanity as we are. And so yeah, I think that was basically it. And so in the next video, which is Who's This Jesus Guy Anyways Part 2, I'll be speaking about his birth, his growth, his ministry, his fulfillment of these prophecies, these Old Testament prophecies, which are also mentioned then, and his crucifixion and his resurrection. And then there's probably going to be a third video that is just basically about the prophecies that are about his second coming. You know, that one's a bit freaky because nobody wants to talk about Revelations, which is the last book of the Bible, and what's just happening in there. So yeah, this is going to be basically a 3-part mini-series, very mini-series. Hopefully it will be just those 3 videos, it won't be more than that, but hopefully you guys will come back and watch the other videos. Oh my gosh, I've always wanted to say this. Please comment, like, subscribe, hit that subscribe button, the notification bell, so that you can get, you know, notification when I post a video, obviously. But anyways, lots of love here at the Agape Movement from me and God and our camera woman to you. Bye.